I don't even know why I'm writing this. Maybe because I need to get it all out of my head before it eats me alive. Maybe because if something like this ever happens to you, I want you to listen to that gut feeling, that primal sense of danger we like to ignore because we tell ourselves we're overreacting. That instinct is what keeps you alive. I almost died because I ignored mine. It was a Friday night, just a regular evening. I had dinner at my friend Taylor's place. A couple of glasses of wine, some mindless Netflix in the background, talking about nothing and everything at once. She lived in a nice neighborhood. Nothing fancy but safe enough that I never thought twice about walking to my car alone at night. I left her apartment around 10:30. The air was cool but not cold, the kind of crisp night where the city feels oddly quiet. Streetlights cast long, empty shadows and most of the storefronts were dark. The roads weren't deserted, but they weren't busy either. A couple of people walked in the distance, their heads down, lost in their own worlds. I had parked 2 blocks away, just past the little corner store that was already closed for the night. As I walked, I pulled out my phone, half distracted, scrolling through messages. That's probably why I didn't notice him at first. But then I felt it. You know that feeling when you're being watched? When your skin prickles and you don't even need to turn around to know that someone is looking right at you. I slowed my steps and casually glanced over my shoulder. A man was walking behind me. I wouldn't have thought much of it at first. It's a city. People walk places. But something about him felt off. He wasn't just walking. He was matching my pace, his steps deliberate. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in dark clothes. A hoodie pulled up despite the mild weather. I turned back around, my pulse picking up just a little. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe I was just being paranoid. But then I sped up. And so did he. My throat tightened. Okay, no big deal. Just get to the car. It was maybe a minute away, parked on a side street. I could see the turn up ahead. But I needed to be sure. I stopped abruptly, pretending to check my phone. He stopped too. Not immediately, but a second later, just long enough to make it obvious that he was reacting to me. I felt a wave of cold rush through me. This is real. This is happening. I started walking again, faster this time. And that's when I heard it. His footsteps quickening behind me. No hesitation. No doubt anymore. He was following me. A surge of adrenaline hit me so hard I felt my fingertips tingle. I didn't think. I ran. Full sprint. Legs burning, my breath sharp and ragged. I barely heard anything except the pounding in my ears, until I did hear something. Him. Running too. I turned the corner sharply, my car just down the block. I fumbled in my jacket pocket for my keys, but my fingers were shaking too badly. Not fast enough. I darted across the street instead, heading straight for an alley between 2 buildings. I barely processed it, just acted on pure instinct. The alley was dark and narrow, a dumpster shoved up against one side, a fire escape leading up the other. I threw myself behind the dumpster, pressing my back against the cold, grimy metal. My chest rose and fell in shallow gasps, my hands shaking so badly I had to clamp them over my mouth to keep quiet. And then, footsteps. Slower now. Measured. Right at the mouth of the alley. I squeezed my eyes shut for half a second, as if not seeing him would make him disappear. But then I forced myself to look. He stood just outside the alley, silhouetted under the dim orange streetlight. His hoodie was still up, his face half shadowed. I couldn't see his eyes, but I could feel them, watching. Then he took a step forward. A slow, deliberate step. Then another. My heart pounded so hard I thought he'd hear it. I pressed myself flatter against the dumpster, barely breathing. I felt like an animal trapped in a corner, heart hammering, unable to do anything but wait. And he kept coming. I could hear his breathing now, deep, steady, not rushed. Like he wasn't worried. Like he knew I was trapped. Like he was enjoying this. I forced myself to think. What do I do? What the fuck do I do? The fire escape. It was a long shot, but it was my only shot. If I could just... Then suddenly he stopped. Just a few feet away. For a second, everything was silent except for the distant hum of the city. Then, a sound. A soft click. I knew that sound. A knife. He had a fucking knife. I didn't have time to hesitate. Didn't have time to breathe. I moved. I launched myself up, grabbing the lowest rung of the fire escape and yanking myself up just as I heard him lunge. My foot barely missed his outstretched hand. I climbed like my life depended on it because it did. Below me, I heard him curse, heard the scrape of metal against brick as he tried to grab at my leg. I didn't look down. I just climbed. And then I heard something else. A noise from the other end of the alley. Something that made him stop. Something that saved my life. A car. Tires screeching. Headlights flashing against the wall. And just like that, he was gone. I scrambled onto the fire escape landing, heart slamming into my ribs, gasping for air. But when I looked down, the alley was empty. No footsteps. No shadow. Just the quiet, empty street below. But I knew what I saw. And I knew he was still out there. Waiting. I stayed on that fire escape for a long time, frozen, my whole body still trembling from the adrenaline. My fingers clung to the rusted metal railing so tightly that my knuckles turned white. Below me, the alley was empty. The street beyond it looked normal, cars passing, streetlights flickering, life continuing like I hadn't just been chased by a man with a knife. But I knew what I saw. And I knew he was still out there. Waiting. I couldn't go back down. Not yet. My car was still parked a block away, but there was no way in hell I was going to just walk back out onto the street and hope he was gone. What if he was hiding behind a car? What if he was waiting for me to come back down? I turned my head, scanning the side of the building. The fire escape went higher, leading up to the rooftop, but there was no way down from there. The building itself looked old, abandoned, even dirty brick, boarded up windows, graffiti scrawled along the lower walls. And then I noticed something. One of the second-floor windows was open. Barely just a crack. The glass was grimy, streaked with years of dust and rain, but it was open enough that I could pry it the rest of the way. I didn't think twice. I just moved. I climbed across the fire escape, gripping the cold metal bars, and pulled myself toward the window. The hinges groaned as I pushed it up, the sound cutting through the silence like a warning. My heart pounded as I hoisted myself through, landing awkwardly on a wooden floor covered in dust. Inside it was dark. And silent. I stayed crouched for a moment, barely breathing, listening. Nothing. No voices. No movement. Just the heavy stillness of an abandoned place. I pulled my phone out, using the dim glow of the screen to look around. The room I had climbed into looked like it had once been an office. An old wooden desk stood against the far wall, its surface covered in dirt and scattered papers. A broken chair sat on its side, one of its legs snapped clean off. The air smelled stale, like mildew and rotting wood. I swallowed hard. I really didn't want to be in here. But it was safer than being out there. At least that's what I told myself. I needed a way out. Somewhere I could slip away unseen, get back to my car without stepping into the open where he might be watching. I crept toward the doorway, my shoes barely making a sound against the dusty floor. The hallway beyond was long and narrow, lined with doors. Some of them were open, revealing more empty rooms, others shut tight like they were holding secrets I didn't want to uncover. A chill ran down my spine. I took a step forward. The floor creaked beneath me, the sound echoing down the hall. I froze. And then, a noise. From downstairs. A slow, deliberate creak. Like a footstep. I felt a rush of cold terror spread through my body. He found me. I backed up, pressing myself against the wall, forcing myself to stay silent. My mind raced. Think. The front door must be downstairs. If I ran for it, I'd have to go straight through the main floor, right where he was. Another sound. Not a footstep this time. Something softer. Breathing. Slow. Steady. Coming from the stairwell. He wasn't moving anymore. He was listening, waiting for me to make a sound. I covered my mouth with my hands, biting back a shaky breath. I had to move. Now! I turned and bolted toward the nearest room, slipping inside just as the stairs creaked again. He was coming up. I had seconds. My phone's screen cast just enough light for me to see where I was. Another office like the first. A window shut tight. No way out. I heard him reach the top of the stairs. The floorboards groaned under his weight as he stepped onto the landing. He was here. And he was looking for me. I pressed myself against the wall, my heart hammering so hard I swore he could hear it. The room was small, empty except for an old wooden desk and a metal filing cabinet shoved into the corner, both coated in dust. The air was stale, thick with that damp, rotten smell of abandoned buildings. And just outside the door he was there. I could hear him. Slow, careful footsteps, each one measured, deliberate. He wasn't just walking. He was searching. I didn't breathe. I didn't move. My hand hovered over my phone screen, the light still on, casting a faint glow against the floor. I quickly pressed the button to turn it off, plunging the room into total darkness. Another step. Then another. He was getting closer. I could hear the faintest shift in his breathing, controlled but heavy, like someone concentrating, someone listening for the smallest sound. Then, a door creaked open. Not mine. One of the other rooms. He was checking them, one by one. I forced myself to think, to move. I couldn't just stand here like a deer in headlights. My eyes adjusted slightly to the darkness, enough that I could make out the outline of the filing cabinet. It was pushed up against the wall, leaving just enough space behind it. It wasn't much, but it was something. I moved as slowly as I could, every muscle in my body tense, lowering myself to the floor and sliding into the narrow space behind the cabinet. Dust filled my nose, making my eyes water. I clamped a hand over my mouth, squeezing my eyes shut as I tried to make myself as small as possible. And then, my door opened. A soft creak as it swung inward. I could feel him step inside. Silence. Then, a quiet, deliberate sniff, like he was smelling the air. My stomach twisted in horror. He knew. He fucking knew I was in here. I squeezed my fingers over my lips, my chest burning with the effort to stay completely still. A long pause. Then, click. That sound again. The knife. I could hear the faint scrape of metal against fabric as he adjusted his grip, hear the soft rustle of his hoodie as he shifted. He was standing right in the middle of the room. Waiting. Listening. I didn't move. Didn't breathe. Seconds stretched into an eternity. Then, he moved. Not out of the room. Toward the desk. Toward me. I felt my body go ice cold. His footsteps were slow, precise. I could see his shadow shifting in the dim moonlight that seeped through the grimy window. Then, he stopped. Right in front of the cabinet. I saw his boots first. Large, dark, heavy. Filthy, like he had been walking through mud. I felt my pulse in my throat, my vision tunneling. He knows. He knows I'm here. He's going to look. He's going to find me. He's going to. A noise. From the hallway. Something shifting. The floor creaking. Another presence. Something else in the building. His head snapped up. He went still. A long moment of tense silence. Then without a word he turned and walked out of the room. I barely heard his footsteps as he moved down the hall, silent now, careful. I didn't move. Didn't dare. Because I wasn't sure what was worse. Him. Or whatever else had just arrived. I stayed frozen behind that cabinet, my body cramping, my lungs burning from holding my breath for so long. I could still hear his footsteps, quieter now, more careful. He was moving down the hall toward whatever had made that noise. I wasn't safe. Not even close. But this was my chance. I waited, counting in my head. 5 seconds. 10. 15. I heard another floorboard creak farther down, near the stairs. He was still up here. But he was distracted. I moved. As quietly as I could, I inched forward, shifting my weight onto my hands and knees. My fingers pressed into thick layers of dust, but I ignored it. My whole body ached from crouching in such a tight space, but I gritted my teeth and forced myself to keep going. I crawled toward the door, pausing in the doorway to listen. Nothing. I risked a glance down the hall. It was darker now, the moonlight barely reaching this far. The door stood open, gaping like black mouths. I couldn't see him, or whoever or whatever else was in here. I swallowed and stepped into the hallway. One step, then another. I kept close to the wall, moving slow, my hands shaking as I gripped my phone. I didn't dare turn it on. Then, a noise from behind me. A whisper. Soft. Indistinct. Right from the room I had just been in. I whipped my head around, my breath catching. The room was dark. Still. Empty. I felt cold all over, like something was pressing down on my skin, squeezing the air from my lungs. My legs felt locked, my body screaming at me to run. I took a step back, and the floor creaked beneath me. Loud. Too loud. I froze. Silence. Then, a shift. From him. Down the hall. His footsteps picked up again. Fast. Coming back toward me. Panic surged through me, my fight or flight response kicking in so hard my legs nearly gave out. I turned and ran. I didn't care about the noise anymore. I bolted down the hallway, my shoes skidding against the dusty floor. My pulse pounded in my ears, drowning out everything except my own ragged breath. The stairwell, I had to get to the stairs. I could hear him behind me now. Close. Too close. I flew around the corner and nearly tripped. The stairs were in front of me, leading down into total darkness. The railing was broken in places, the steps sagging with decay. I hesitated for half a second, a half second too long, because that's when I heard it. His breath. Right behind me. I didn't think. I just threw myself forward. The stairs groaned beneath me as I stumbled down them, gripping the railing so hard my fingers ached. The wood splintered under my weight, snapping in one place, and I barely caught myself before I went tumbling headfirst. Behind me, his footsteps. Pounding. He was chasing me. He was right fucking there. I reached the bottom and turned sharply, nearly slipping on the filthy tile floor. The front doors had to be here somewhere. I could see the faintest outline of a lobby, moonlight barely reaching through boarded-up windows. But I didn't get far. Because the second I stepped into the open, I saw something that made my blood turn to ice. Another figure, standing near the entrance. Still, motionless, watching. My breath caught in my throat. I couldn't make out the details. Just a silhouette, a dark shape in the faint light. A second of hesitation, a second too long. Because behind me, he reached for me, and his fingers brushed my shoulder. The second I felt his fingers brush my shoulder, pure terror exploded in my chest. I lurched forward, twisting violently away from his grip, my breath coming out in a sharp, broken gasp. He almost had me. Almost. I stumbled back, my shoes scraping against the tile. My eyes darted to the figure near the entrance. It hadn't moved. Not an inch. Just stood there, watching. My body screamed at me to run, but my brain had no idea where. The front door was behind that figure. The stairwell, no fucking way I was going back up there. I was trapped. And then, click. That sound. Again. The knife. I whipped my head back toward him. The dim light barely illuminated his face, but I saw the glint of the blade in his hand. He tilted his head slightly like he was considering something. Then he spoke. A low, quiet voice. You ran fast. I didn't respond. My throat was dry, my heart slamming against my ribs so hard it hurt. A slow step forward. His boots scraped against the floor. Smart girl, he murmured. But not smart enough. I backed up instinctively, only to remember. The figure. Still there. Still watching. A fresh wave of horror crashed over me. I was stuck between them. I risked a glance back. My stomach turned. The figure was wrong. Not standing naturally. Its posture was stiff, head tilted slightly downward, arms limp at its sides. Like a mannequin. Like it wasn't alive. But I knew it was. I could feel it watching me. Panic set in, clouding my thoughts. My legs trembled, torn between running and freezing in place. Then, the man behind me moved. Fast. I barely saw him lunge before instinct took over. I ducked, throwing myself to the side just as his knife slashed through the air where my neck had been. I hit the floor hard, pain jolting up my arm, but I scrambled to my feet, ignoring it. I bolted. Not toward the door. Not toward the stairs. Side hallway. To my right. The only way out. I didn't think. Just ran. Footsteps thundered behind me. His, not the figure's. It hadn't moved. I threw myself down the hall, nearly slamming into the wall as I turned a corner. Total darkness. The air was thick, heavy with dust and something rotting. But I didn't care. I just had to get out. I sprinted blindly down the dark hallway, my breath ragged, my pulse a violent drumbeat in my ears. The air was suffocating, thick with dust, damp with decay. My fingers skimmed the walls, desperate for something, anything, to guide me through the blackness. Behind me, his footsteps thundered, closing in. I had to be faster. I forced my legs to move, pushing through the pain in my side, the burn in my calves. I turned a corner, nearly slipping on the warped wooden floor. The hallway stretched ahead, endless and pitch black. Then, I saw it. A door. Slightly open. A way out. I didn't hesitate. I lunged for it, shoving it open and stumbling inside, only to realize too late. It was a dead end. The room was small. Empty. No windows. No other doors. Just four crumbling walls and the terrible realization that I had just trapped myself. I spun around, reaching for the handle to yank the door shut. But he was already there. Standing in the doorway. Blocking my only escape. My stomach plummeted. The dim light from the hallway cast his silhouette in eerie shadow. I could barely see his face, but I felt his grin. Slowly, he stepped inside. The knife glinted in his hand. I backed up, my spine hitting the far wall. My fingers scraped against the peeling wallpaper as I searched blindly, desperately for something, anything I could use. Nothing. He exhaled a slow, satisfied breath. "Nowhere to go," he murmured. He took another step, then another, until there was barely any space between us. I couldn't outrun him this time. I couldn't hide. My body trembled, panic rising like a scream in my throat. I clenched my fists, my nails digging into my palms, my mind racing. He lifted the knife slightly, tilting his head, like he was savoring the moment, like he was enjoying this. My heart pounded against my ribs. Then, he lunged. I reacted on instinct. I dropped, throwing my body to the side at the last second. His momentum carried him forward too fast, too hard. His arm slammed into the wall with force. And the knife. It lodged into the wood. For half a second he was stuck. I didn't hesitate. I moved. I shoved past him, my shoulder colliding with his as I barreled through the doorway and ran. I heard him snarl behind me, yanking the knife free. His footsteps thundering after me once more. But I had a head start. And this time, I wasn't going to waste it. I sprinted down the hall, not stopping, not looking back, my only focus on getting the hell out. I ran like my life depended on it, because it did. The hallway blurred around me. Nothing but shadows and flashes of decayed walls as I sprinted, pushing my body to its absolute limit. My lungs burned. My legs screamed. But I couldn't stop. Behind me, his footsteps. Fast. Angry. Close. I shot around the corner, nearly slipping as I reached the main lobby again. The dim moonlight filtering through the broken boards gave me just enough to see. And then I saw it. The door. Wide open. Not locked. Not blocked. Just open. I felt a jolt of desperate hope. I could make it. I would make it. I pushed harder, my legs screaming in protest as I ran straight for the exit. And then, a noise. A deep scraping shift from the shadows. The figure. It moved. For the first time. I saw it jerk slightly, its head tilting toward me in a slow, unnatural motion. I had no time to process. No time to think. I ran past it, barely breathing as I tore through the doorway and into the night. Cold air slammed into me. The silence of the abandoned building was replaced by the distant hum of the city, the far-off sound of cars, of life. I didn't stop. Not until I reached the street. Not until I saw lights. Not until I was sure he wasn't behind me anymore. I finally turned back. The building loomed in the dark, its windows hollow and empty. The doorway I had just escaped from stood wide open, yawning like a mouth. No sign of him. No sign of the figure. Nothing. Just silence. I stood there, gasping for air, my entire body shaking. My hands were clammy, my skin ice-cold despite the sweat pouring down my back. Then, a shadow. Not him. Not the figure. Mine. Cast against the pavement from the dim glow of a nearby streetlight. But there was something wrong. Something off. Because for half a second, it looked like there was another shadow standing right next to me. And then just as quickly it was gone. I didn't stay to find out what it meant. I turned and ran. Away from the building. Away from whatever was inside. Away from the nightmare I barely escaped. And I never looked back. That was months ago. I still don't know what happened that night. I still don't know who he was or what he wanted. But sometimes when I'm alone, when it's late at night, and I catch my shadow stretching across the floor, I swear I see something else standing beside me, watching, waiting, like it followed me home.